All right. It is 10:02, and I'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. As we gather, we would like to acknowledge on behalf of the Renfrew area OPP Detachment Board and our community that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. We would like to thank the Algonquin people and express our respect and support for their rich history, and we are extremely grateful for their many and continued displays of friendship. We also thank all of the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. So we'll call the meeting to order at 10:03. Do we need motions for that? Do we normally traditionally do them?
I don't.
Okay. So disclosure of pecuniary interests and any general nature thereof. Seeing none. And acknowledge that Steve is attending through Zoom. So thank you. The agenda's been provided. Can I get somebody to move the agenda? So, John, Lisa. So report of the Finance Committee. Jason can't be here today. He sends his regrets. We do have quorum. We had a rather good discussion on the draft, and this still is very much a draft budget. But recognizing that two key people weren't in the room, we did not want to move further until we had all the voices engaged on this. Just before we start, because I know there has been communication and an email in terms of how this process is going forward in terms of the CAO engagement and our respective municipal councils. Our role as a board is to develop a budget using best practices of other community, other boards as well. We've reached out to them as part of the R&D. This is a little bit of old information that we discussed last time, but for the new people at the table and online. We developed this budget by discussion, by taking the opportunity at AMO to meet with other boards that were going through similar discussions, and looking at our mandates, and also from the information that we gained during the Blue Mountain meeting with the Association of the Ontario Association of Police Services Boards. That was the genesis for the first round. We brought it forward for discussion. Our mandate as a board is for us at this level to land on a draft. Plan forward would be then to communicate that draft to all of the CAOs and bring them into the discussion once we land on consensus at this table. So there will be an email going out in the coming days to share with them where we've landed and seek their comments, input, suggestions, because ultimately this will go to the municipalities, to the respective councils for their review and adoption. And that needs to be by consensus. Failing that consensus, it then transfers automatically by default to the Inspector General, and his office then decrees what the budget will be, and they'll send an order to municipalities to pay based on a prescribed formula that they have. So it's very much within our control, but we need eventually to land on consensus. So plan was to get it discussed at this table so that we are relatively comfortable with it going to the next level, which would be for information and discussion at the CAO level. And then the CAOs, we would then go back to the CAOs with a full package that they would present for consideration of the respective councils. One last comment is on insurance. So this is still very much in draft, and we're cognizant of the potential exposure because we are making financial decisions. I've reached out as of yesterday to the Ontario Association. Based on the mandate we had at the last meeting, we are going to make application for insurance under them. They need a maximum of 40 boards. Sorry, Angela, at the last meeting we talked about insurance, and there were 3 venues. One was with Intact Insurance. They've designed a product specifically for boards. on an individual basis. So we would need to apply directly, and Lisa as well, we need to apply directly to them. They're around the $5,000 mark. It's a good product, but we are unilateral with them. The next is a second company called Aon, which is prohibitively expensive and not getting much interest by boards. The third option is the association has reached out to an insurance company to provide a bulk package for all police boards who wish to go through their group policy, similar to how hospitals insure en masse as opposed to individual. They're projecting $3,500 to $5,000 a year, depending on how many people we have signed up for it, and they're taking in applications now. The benefit of going with them is its safety in numbers. We have a product that is designed for all boards in Ontario. The application process is significantly easier, and once we're in, to renew on an annual basis, there's only 3 questions that we'll need to apply. You know, have we had any claims, significant changes in the board, or any significant deviations from our policies? So we had a motion to start that discussion with the association, and we're just ready now to submit. It's a very light form. They just need to know our name, our mailing address, contact person, and have we had any claims under the old board in the last 5 years. And claim does not mean a nuisance claim that had been turned down, but one that went through and had financial cost. So that's the background on where we're at, and then moving forward with this. So sorry, Lisa, you had a...
I just had a question back to an earlier part, and I apologize that
No.
it was already responded before. So you mentioned consensus before it goes, before we be required to go forward. Does consensus have to happen at this level, or do you mean consensus once it hits our respective
councils?
Okay, so our discussion at this board can be our discussion at this board.
Correct. We will need to have a vote, and it will be the vote that carries this forward. It gives us the mandate to take it to the CAOs. And there's no point, most boards have not gone to CAOs. The board has developed the draft budget and sent it straight to the respective councils. It's the CAO who sets the tone, and I think it's prudent to us to go to them first, and then the package submitted to them for presentation to council, but that they would then at least have a kick at the can on the contentious points. So to the budget, I'm going to throw it to the floor. We received fairly constant support on governance, operation, and program, kind of the gray flannel area of the budget, the mandated actions. We had discussions on the honorariums, and I think that's the area where we need to focus. We'll go through the whole budget, but I think honorariums is the one where we need to spend some time on. Scott?
If I remember correctly, and I'm just verifying facts, so the honorarium for the...
Is your mic on for...
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Steve. Not used to somebody sitting up in the... So our last meeting, I know we had talked about honorariums and whatever, but this year's honorarium, is that going to be paid for in January, or I forget how we worked out this year's?
I thought we talked about this starting in January. That may be, I may be wrong, and it should be revisited, because we do need a budget from now until, from April 1 until December 31st, because we have expenses that we need to report on. And there's an opportunity that we'll be receiving funding from the province for implementation the first year. Not a guarantee, but they're looking at it. So we need to have a budget to send in saying this is what our expenditures were. Supplemental?
Yeah, supplemental. Well, I know myself, I don't feel that the board should be doing this for free this year. Now, we did only start in March, so I don't think the full $2,000 per member including mileage, is warranted, but I do believe asking the board to work for free is not something that I'd want to support,
Okay.
especially for members that, you know, we have two sitting members that, you know, have no pay to be on the board. So to actually ask them to do this for free, again, I'm only one vote, but we did put in the time, we did put in the mileage going back and forth, and
Valid point. I think if we could park it, send it back to the Finance Committee as one suggestion. Our priority is to get the 2025 budget moving so we can get it to the respective councils in advance or in sync with their budget deliberations. And then we get Finance to look at the budget. The budget till the year end will be covered by the town of Renfrew, with the understanding that at the year end, it will be cost shared. And I know that the CAOs had that discussion in January when this came to fruition, that Renfrew said they would, but it's a very minor, limited, only essential budget. So I don't know about how that, but we need to have that discussion for a second budget. But I think today we really need to get the 25 year done. Lisa, and then.
Just another question, more so than a comment, and I'm sure I saw it when I was reviewing this. Is there not a requirement at this stage that there be a minimum of $150? It's not baked into the act that there is a minimum of $150 per meeting for remuneration, in which case, for the remainder of this year, I would assume that we fall under that same legislation?
Correct.
So that is a requirement for this year, however.
However, we make that develop into there's a requirement for remuneration under the legislation. We haven't had the time or the capacity to address it currently. We had to jump immediately to next year so we can get it rolling, but the same logic would apply. It would just be prorated. How you doing, Ange? This is all new. I could see the facial expression going, oh.
You did tell me not to play poker. So just because I'm catching up,
Yep.
Is it a foregone conclusion that we are going to be getting remuneration for this? I see a head nod and a head shake.
We had agreed that we would get remuneration, and the discussion was around taking the amount off the table. We need to recognize that we are not here as councillors. I think we've crossed that threshold, and we realize we're sitting as board members. We provide the voice from the municipality, but the legislation is really clear. Once we arrive, we are not Councillor Field. You are here as the board member representing your municipality, but you're not here sitting as a councillor. That's the issue with insurance. That's the issue with all of the stuff that's gone through. Then they talk about remuneration because they realize this is not something that our community members signed up for. They need to have a reason to participate. And because we're not municipal councillors and we need an equal playing field, we need to look at the compensation to us. The second point of the conversation was at $150 a meeting, it becomes very expensive because we're going to need to look at meetings on finance. We're going to need governance work done next year. We will have appraisals of the detachment commander. The selection of a detachment commander, should that come up, and every time we meet, it's $1,200. So what boards have done is set a flat rate, and it ranged between the $1,500 and $2,000, which is for the full year, as a way to offset the potential for cost overrun. And that we, at the last meeting, we came forward initially with 1,500 plus mileage and realized not everybody claims mileage, but you're driving a long way in, as is Lisa, not quite as far, but that we bumped it to 2,000 flat rate, your basically time and mileage for coming to meetings in Renfrew. If you're going to provincial association meetings or to the zone meetings, then you put a travel claim in and collect mileage to that. That's kind of where we landed. That it's a hard call, and that's the discussion for today, because I know we all have different, I worry about the optics, but I also worry about the legislation. And it's something we need to come. Again, the reason we came out of the last meeting agreeing to the 2,000 as a place marker in a very draft budget, because we didn't have all the voices at the table, and we didn't want to do that, pass it without having this discussion here today. So here we are.
Yeah.
Lisa?
So if questions on the floor are done, I'm happy to share my comments and my thoughts on this, which my understanding is that they don't necessarily align to and I get the sense they don't necessarily align to those at the table. Certainly when we arrive here, we are not members of council. I recognize that, but we are here because we are members of council. We wouldn't be here if, right, the legislation dictates. So just by that. And my oath of office included all of the things. I happily agreed to join without expectation of any remuneration.
Correct. And
I realize that's at odds with what the legislation actually says, which is thou shalt compensate for board members. We don't have a choice other than to receive some payment. My support would go towards the absolute lowest option in that regard. And at 2K, that works out to be 13 1/3 meetings in the course of a year. Is that the expectation? Is that realistic?
At 2,000? Mm-hmm. So part of that was mileage. We had originally suggested 1,500, so it would be, I thought we had looked at eight meetings or 9 meetings. John, do you remember the conversation we had at the committee? Because we were at 1,500 and then we talked about.
Yeah, because then it got into the subcommittees like finance and other things. So to your point, it was more of a, just do a blanket, because otherwise then the administrator spends time going, who's at what meeting, who did what, just make it simpler. And again, sorry. Steve, can you hear me if I talk next to Lisa as well, because hers is green? Yeah, the point then became ease of administration, right, for a small amount. If we start nickel and diming and it's X amount. I didn't know if you give it 2 at once. But we start...
my apologies.
That's all right. If we start doing this backwards and forwards, and again, how do we administer this? Who came to the finance committee? Will there be more subcommittees? We start applying for grants. We're going to have grant committees, right? We're going to... So, yes, we'll have our regular board meetings. This became a simplistic way. And the other thing, if I look at sort of other non-police boards, honorarium is also sort of more that contractual, which is why they've put it in, right? You are now, with that financing thing, there's a contractual obligation of you are being paid to behave in a certain manner.
I'm going to need more money.
And I get your point about, nobody's going to get rich off this. This is not a living wage being paid to showing up. And again, come back to what is reasonable and what would your, taxpayers believe is reasonable for showing up. And that was also part of the conversation. If I look at even charities, board charities, be it United Way or whatever, they will do an honorarium for that contractual connection. So that is part of how other boards will function. And again, just making it simple. If you do a flat rate, right, the administration is real easy. Here it is, show up. And that was also part of sort of that conversation, because to your point, yes, we could do it by meeting and then, travel expenses, et cetera, but you can take all that noise out of something, because otherwise you are spending as much to administer a $150 claim as you are to just give it in the first place, which again is, not something you want anybody doing.
I appreciate that context. Hasn't necessarily changed my mind, though. And again, this is based on, we're all part of councils of, teams of councils, and I have had some dialogue with the rest of my crew. And the first question I got was, what do you mean board remuneration? And I shared an explanation very similar, though not as eloquent as what you just provided. And everybody was in agreement that, look, this is what we do. And so on that end, I can't support $2,000 a year. I'd be happy to support, the minimum, the 150 plus mileage, and maybe with a review in a year, or if we do go, if there is appetite, because I get the sense that there's majority here who is supportive of the 2,000, that we put down that we review this in a year's time. To see whether or not this crew has earned their keep, so to speak, and justified a 2,000, because we're also going to be heavier in the first year
Yes.
than we will be moving forward. And so if that's the litmus test in terms of what a worst case scenario could look like for us versus as we move forward, that would be, so I can't support what's in front of us. That's, are we going through the entire budget? Because I have other comments too.
Yes.
Okay. With regards to...
Oh, sorry, I just stop, Anne's jump in for a second, if we're still on the remuneration.
I need to say I agree. I feel that it was part of the oath that we took to serve our municipalities. However, it is not an oath that our volunteer community members took, and I feel that they absolutely
100%.
should be remunerated. They stepped up. We were sort of told we had to step up. We were voluntold.
Yes.
So I'm very much with Lisa in that I have a really hard time looking at this and taking this back to a lot of our municipalities and saying, guess what, we're going to need more money. And I have a lot of issues taking it to our taxpayers and saying, guess what, we're going to need more money.
I share that. I think the narrative is going to be very challenging either way.
1 sec.
Oh, sorry, let me turn this off. My computer's got a mind of its own today. And I too have struggled with it. I've spent a lot of time talking to other boards, and we're all in this same situation. Looking forward a year, taking our role here, let's put our municipal hats back on for a minute. We're going to be in a position next year going out to our electoral base with a significant increase in policing costs. So our budgets are going to go up with the new legislation and the new rate of pay for policing. So it's going to be more expensive for basic services. On top of that, now we have this new legislation, that the new bill that's come in, that's being downloaded to municipalities, even taking the 20,000 out, or 22,000, or 30,000, we're still looking at a budget of a $90,000 that's bare bones, without any remuneration. And that's just to fulfill our legislative mandate. So we are going to have need to have a discussion at our respective municipal tables as to how do we fund it through whatever formula is arrived at, and how do we communicate that to the public? Because policing is going to become a significant increase in our budget lines moving forward, excluding the board. John?
Do we know, because we haven't got the 2 provincial reps yet, do we know whether they will come under this budget or the province will be looking after them?
They will come under our budget.
Okay, so they remain 2, or a single line item for 2 people, which remains an unknown. And I mean, I get the point about, we got voluntold to be here type approach. But I think I go back to Chairman's comment on, but you're not here. This is a unique board setting, right? And I think that's also part of that to say, and I get the point, you could have a provincial line, the, community lines, and then the council reps. That may be one way of skinning this cat, which is one line remains unknown, and then you're setting your effective remuneration. But again, it's still in the legislation. So you have to do, the council representatives have to be remunerated because that's the legislation. But again, I think that's kind of the thing going back to set. And I don't know what the previous police board remuneration was either. So that would also be, something to be able to go back to your council to say, this is what we said, this is still a cheaper board than previous. I don't know, right? But again, it's how do we set the tone for this, to your point, to not just your fellow councillors back at your townships, but also the electoral.
So I actually did serve on the previous police service board until we got shuffled in here, and there was no remuneration.
There was a little to the chair. There was a
I
monthly.
was the chair.
Were you?
I had no remuneration for the police services board in Admaston Bromley Township.
Interesting.
That's not what,
That's not,
that's not at all what I was told.
I was told, but you were on that board. You weren't on the Renfrew board.
They're two different boards.
Yes.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I believe each board worked independently and had their own, there was no requirement for remuneration, so each board determined that.
I know Renfrew did have a small amount for the chair. But, so just to go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so just to be clear, I fully support our community members and the chair, who certainly does have a much heavier workload. From day one, I've been supportive of that. You've got a much heavier role, but I will disagree that we, those of us who are elected representatives, deserve to be remunerated for our role here, recognizing again that there's legislation that says that we must be, and I will put it on record that wherever we do land, mine is going back into the community. It will be through the form of a donation because it makes me very uncomfortable, so much so that I will not be taking it. So I also come from the school that says it should not cost you money to do your job, so mileage I will be taking and claiming out of
Yes.
that. But in terms of time and effort, I can't. So that's where I plan to land on that one.
So if we roll back to our first meeting, we had $1,500 plus mileage when people felt they wanted to put mileage in. Or alternatively, we go to the flat $150 a meeting as required in the legislation. Scott?
So with Belleville, the first meeting that Rob and I went to, we talked to, I probably talked to 3 or 4 different boards who were in the midst of doing their budgeting and whatever. And it was, the chairs were getting in between $250. The vice chair was getting between $175 and $225. And then it was anywhere from right around the $150 mark for all the, but like the finance committee decided that we were just going to go as, you're a different entity because you're constantly driving up here. But I was taking no more. I was taking the same as everybody else to try to save some money. So, I can sit on both sides. If we are a reporting board, then, I believe we take the less, and that's why I looked at the 1,500, just putting it all in as $2,000. That was actually my suggestion last meeting. is that, you know, we could end up coming to 12, we could end up coming to 9. We don't know yet. It's the unknown. So I figure next year's budget, we're gonna look back and, well, we only did 7. Well, let's rear that back, you know? But the province is pushing quite hard that they want a budget for all of 2025. So it's, you know, yeah, like I say, I can go either way, Lisa. I you know, I'm 100%, you know, see exactly what you're saying, but everybody else is doing it. So that's the only, I think we've looked at it as the lowest cost right now. And that's why I asked about this year. You know, are we even going to get anything this year? And that was brought up to me by my council. They don't seem to have a problem with it. I have more of a problem with it than some of my council. But that, you know, I just wanted to let you know that we've talked to quite a few other boards, and they start a lot higher than where we are. So, you know, and in saying that, their budgets are crazy. Like the one budget was astronomical. It was $250 per, plus mileage, plus this, plus that. And it's like, oh my goodness, like how can you even justify that? But yeah. So I just wanted to let you know what we have talked about in Belleville and why I had suggested the 200 or 2,000 as a cap.
So at 1,500 or 150 a meeting, let's assume next year we have 8 meetings and we have 4 committee meetings. That comes up to 180. If we bring our meetings down to 6 board meetings, so one every 2 months, which I think once we're established will become the norm. I don't think we're going to need to meet every month. But because there won't be a lot going on. Once we're up and running, we have the budget, we have the insurance, we have the programs running. We're just now getting an update in the reporting from OPP, and our main goal here is to provide community input into policing priorities, which is not a monthly activity. It's looking at trends and coming together every 2 months. As also to be able to, through our website and our engagement with municipalities, provide information back to the municipalities on policing in the area so that they know there's a community lens. So, you know, if we meet every second month, that comes down to 6 meetings and 4 committees is 10, so we're back to $150, at 150 a meeting. We carve out the tax or the travel, and those who wish and feel, and everybody's entitled to travel, to mileage. We just have that done on a monthly basis, or even every 2 months, because there's not going to be a lot of travel.
Is there an option that we can actually, just trying to, if we submit mileage through our municipality, for those who are members of council, submit through our respective councils based on our policy that we have, and then we come up with our flat rate for
Travel?
Well, for meeting attendance, because we wouldn't be taking travel if we're putting that through council. And
But the council has no authority at the,
But we could, through our budget, determine that we are compensating each one. I'm looking at Carolyn and, because if it's travel related to, because we are, again, we're on, members of council are here because we have to be here. We have to have one representative from each council. So that would, and I should have confirmed it with our treasurer, that would immediately, my belief is, mean it falls under our policies and procedures. Correct?
But you're here as, when you leave your house coming here, you are coming here as a board member. You're being compensated by the board for travel. If you're in an accident coming here, you would be covered under the board policy, not your council policy. We cannot in any way reach out to council for covering of these expenses. We're doing that currently on the interim because we don't have the structure in place. But going forward, everything will flow through
Okay.
the board.
No, that's good. Right now, we're trying to make some decisions on what largely remains unknown. We don't know how many meetings we're going to have when we sit here over the next year. It could be busy. We could level off very quickly. And I prefer to make decisions on unknowns. And, you know, we have Zoom options as well. What does that look like? I'd much rather that in-person meetings, we have compensation for each one, recognizing it might be a little bit more of an administrative task for everybody to submit. And that way it just, everyone's accountable for their own, and I can explain it to my council in a way that I can believe in and support, saying, look, it is legislated. We have to do this 150 per meeting. And, you know, that's what's baked in there. And we put something in there where we review it in a year's time to see whether or not there's appetite or need for any changes to that. You know, that, again, there are unknowns. We're at the very beginning of this journey, and something might come up where we say, darn, you know, we didn't think about that, and that is going to cost us, and that is going to take more time. But to say that we deserve to be compensated, or we should be compensated at
Wrong language.
it's not, yeah, it wouldn't, definitely not something I'm comfortable with, and something I know that my community and my council would not.
As would mine. So you're suggesting 150 per meeting. For budgeting purposes, we assume 8 meetings a year and 4 committee meetings in a 12-year period.
Is that realistic?
Is that real? So the 4 committee meetings, so each of us is going to have 4 committee meetings through the
No.
year as well?
No.
It's only those who are members of.
So let's say we have 4 committee meetings, though, and there's 3 people on a committee. We'd have to figure that in as well. Just so we need to put a number in it and then explain, as per the legislation, it's 150 a meeting. We're anticipating 8 meetings for the year, and 4 committee meetings with 3 members.
And 8 meetings is $1,200, right? Which
Yeah.
is substantially lower than $2,000.
Yeah.
And my guess is that 8 meetings may actually be on the generous estimation, especially as we move forward. So
agree.
much more of a reason to not
Scott?
lock in at 2,000 out of the gate. You know, rather, I'd like to have some movement in our decisions, and there's nothing saying if things are getting heavier. If we say 150 per, and we find that it's actually not sustainable for whatever reason for any of us, there's nothing saying we can't revisit.
And in the budget, we have a 10% miscellaneous for that, because it's our first year. So there is room for discussion midterm to say we need to revisit this. Scott?
I think if you look, you've got 4 committee meetings, plus you've got your 6 board meetings, plus you and I, you know, if we were to meet, that would be, you know, we wouldn't charge $150 to meet. So I think in the long run, it might end up actually costing us a bit more than 2,000 if you look at the full big picture. But I have no problem with billing per. I was just, I thought it would be cheaper doing it this way.
Sorry, Steve.
No, thank you. Thank you. Through your chair, a question for clarification. Does the new legislation state 150 explicitly, or just that there needs to be remuneration? And I think that is an important piece. I think 150, what I'm hearing, it tends to be a benchmark, but from a planning perspective, maybe that's an important aspect.
Lisa?
I stand to be corrected, but I am 99%, I never say 100% sure, that I saw must be remunerated at a minimum of 150 per meeting.
Correct.
I'm sure that's the stuff that we received was a minimum of 150 to sit on the board, up to whatever you're wanting to pay your chair. Come on.
We all looking at me?
Yeah.
We're all focused on you.
Lisa?
So, Mr. Chair, I'd be prepared to put a motion on the floor whereby we agree to 150 per meeting for review after a 6-month period. And 150 being the minimum, not because I actually believe that it should be 150, but because that is the minimum. And then we plan to review it as a board for discussion in 6 months' time, which would set us up maybe for the second half
review.
of 25 budget.
For review 6 months into the 25 budget. Thoughts?
I'll second.
Oh. Ange, you good with it, or you could live with it, or lesser of all evils?
I'll live with it for now.
We had a mover and a seconder though, right? So
Yes.
Yes, Lisa.
So call for a vote. All in favor?
What is Steve?
Steve?
I apologize. I didn't hear what we're voting on.
So you can still vote on it.
maybe not.
Steve, I move that we give this a 6-month shot at the minimum required of $150, and then we'll review it in 6 months' time, and that it be compensated on a per-meeting basis, just while we see how things flesh out.
Is that beginning 2025?
Correct.
Okay.
We will be opening up discussion at a separate meeting, at our next meeting, when we have a chance to look at our current budget from April 1st till December 31st. But we just
Okay.
want to get this
Thank you.
one through so we can get it out to the CAOs and discussion at councils, respective councils.
We should do both at
Okay.
once.
Thank you.
Because it's going to be part of the, each council's going to have to put a little bit of sum in for this year. So
Correct.
if we're going to do it twice, I'm telling you right now, my council's not going to be okay with us going twice for looking for money.
Well,
It's one shot or nothing.
so we're looking for this year's budget, this current year, is not going to be part of their deliberations in the fall for the 2025. We want to get this one in quickly, like within the next couple of weeks,
Okay.
as council start to look to do their planning before bringing it to their council. I think by the time they're ready at the end of the 25 budget deliberations, we'll have this year's budget. We will know what the insurance is, we'll know what we've had in terms of meetings, what we can expect. And it will just be, Renfrew's agreed or agreed at that earlier meeting, and Rob confirmed to me that they will continue to cover our expenses. And then just do a journal voucher back to the other
Yeah.
municipalities.
Okay.
So a vote on this then?
We did call a vote on it.
Big Bird?
Okay, true.
Steve was just kind of sitting there.
Fair point.
So,
What was going on?
are you okay now, Steve?
So if we-
Okay, so further discussion, all in favor? Okay, thank you. So we have consent. On that first part of the motion for the honorariums. Next item was the chair, the monthly honorarium for the chair. I like the idea of also making that part of the 6-month review discussion, but I can tell you from April 1, this has been 8-fold what I thought it was going to be, with insurance, the meetings, the grants that we have operational. I'm here every second, every third day. Just keeping the money flowing on the grants, because they're still under, the signing authorities are intense. But again, I think that will drop down in the new year, and we structure it. There was also the employer cost. I wasn't sure if honorariums are an honorarium or if there's MERC costs tied. I don't think there are, but we'll.
Previous boards that I've been a member of where there has been small honorariums have not. They've just been a straight in out, like $25 to $25.
And you pay your own taxes on them.
Yes.
Through you, Chair, I'm not a treasurer, so I would say that that discussion might need a little bit more discussion. I do think, and sorry to provide some input on this, but ultimately the board's going to need to look at doing a policy and creating a policy around this so that it's clearly defined on both what the remuneration is going to be as well as what the individual compensations are with, and that's taking into account whether it's mileage, whether it's expenses incurred, whether it's even just when you're at a conference or attending a meeting. So there, I think I do think that there's going to need to be some policy development on that.
Lisa?
So on that item of the chair's portion, I'd be happy to move that it stays the same as it is, again, with the 6-month review. I have no doubt it's very labor intensive, and that should be the case. If we could separate the conferences part of that for a separate discussion, but happy to maybe, if we flesh this out one item at a time and
So if we could, in order to move this through quickly at the end of the day, if we could agree to leave the employer cost in, I will confirm with treasurer both the percentage amount and whether it is required or not. My suspicion is it is, because as we go further down to this, we will have to engage an employee. We will need to get an employee tax number to set up a payroll account for 1 or possibly 3, 4, 5, depending on how grants continue to run in future years. But we'll need an employment account, and that may trigger, preference is not, but we'll clarify it before we bring it forward. Okay.
Sorry, can I just clarify one thing? So the employer costs that you guys are discussing right now, that's just for the honorariums?
Correct.
Okay.
And can we roll through and we'll do a full budget move in second as opposed to line by line, or? Yeah. Okay. So anything else on honorariums? And again, 6-month review.
Or maybe just
Yeah.
sorry, maybe to your point about doing the whole budget, maybe the whole budget's going to come up in a 6-month review, because that'll be a
Yes.
fairly routine cycle. So maybe we put that as a stamp in to say, we're going to review this whole thing in 6 months because we'll know so much more by then. So rather than line by line at 6 months, the whole thing gets reviewed in 6 months.
Perfect. Chair mileage was to offset the runnings from Calabogie to here, or whoever is in the chair, because that comes up as an annual election. But I think we need to recognize there's a lot of time that the chair is running around for administrative purposes.
Sorry, can I go back?
Yeah.
Just to go back, for that, the chair compensation of the $400, Lisa moved it, we didn't get a seconder and we didn't have a vote, but are we deciding to do the line by, or you want to go full on?
Go full on.
Okay, so I'm taking.
No motion yet, we'll bring it down all the way through.
My worry with going, if we have an area where we may not all be aligned, then that might mess up a single resolution.
Okay,
So if my suggestion would be if we do them one at a time, then
Okay.
we can at least have the points where we do agree and then bake them in. Would that be okay?
that's fine.
That is my preference. So
Okay.
if that's the case, it was moved by Lisa, I would need a seconder and would need a vote.
Scott, second. All in favor? Did you get the, okay, perfect, all in favor?
You got the thumbs up.
Okay, all right, thank you. So chair mileage at 1,000. Conferences, the Zone 2, which is a relatively inexpensive meeting. It's usually just accommodation and travel, and I think a $20 registration fee. So this next coming is in September. The one after that is back in Ottawa, so they're all within an easy drive. But that was a place marker. It was budgeted on 3 meetings, and the ability, I don't think we all will go, but as many who want to go will. It's an inexpensive meeting. It's a really good opportunity to spend time with other boards within our geographic area. And then the next was the Ontario Association of Police Services Boards, AGM. It's a relatively expensive meeting. I think it's $850 for the conference fees. It's like going to AMO. It's an expensive endeavor. The next one will be in Ottawa, so travel won't be as expensive as the last. Most of them have their chair, a board member, and their staff, either historically a clerk or now their admin, or their the administrator, and the detachment commander. Detachment commanders funds their own way. So this was putting us in for up to a total of 4 people. Again, as an estimate. So 6 months in, we'll have a better sense of what the real costs are, but we want to have that place mark. I think it's important for us to have the place marker in it. Go ahead.
So if there's no discussion on that, if everybody is in favor of it, we can just do a motion
Scott?
for that travel. So is that the Renfrew area, OPP to approve a total of $14,600 for travel expenses, including chair mileage, Zone 2, and the OAPSB AGM.
Correct. Scott and Angela. All in favor? Perfect, thank you, carried. Governance and operational, 4,000. It's going to land between 35 and 5. I suspect it's going to be 4, but we'll know that quickly. In the letter, they asked, one of the questions is, when would we be able to pay? Because the association is going to take this on, and they don't want people coming back saying next year. So we will be able to pay on receipt of invoice through the generosity of Renfrew carrying this till year end. Reporting, one of our mandates is to do a report, and an annual report on June of each year. And it's a fairly comprehensive report in terms of community impact of policing trends. It's a way for the OPP and this board to report back to the municipalities on policing in the community. So there is some design costs with that. There's some editorial. We're not going to be writing that as board members. It will be farmed out through a small contract to do the final annual report that you can see from any other corporation, a hospital, the United Way. It's and that's a fairly low number because it's not going to be in the first few years horribly sophisticated. The first report will go out, which will be a one-page letter just informing CAOs and councils of our activity to date. And then I thought we'd do another somewhat more formal letter in the spring, once we're launched and the new budget is up and running and we're starting to look to activities for '25. And then the large formal one in June, and then the years following it would just become in June. But we need to stay in touch with them now because they're wondering what we're doing and what the impact's going to be. We need to develop a strat plan. That's legislated. It's in line with the strat plan from the OPP. And again, that's something we can normally write a small contract for. I don't think it needs to be an in-depth strat plan. That's something for future years where we get into a SWOT analysis and all the meat that goes into that. But I think just aligning now with the strat plan. Website design is going to be a one-time cost, but we need a website up fairly quickly. Again, once the insurance is in place. And that's twofold. One, to let the community know we exist, the mandate, the function. If you look at other websites for police services boards, they're starting to come up. It's also a venue for us to share with the municipalities, because right now that communication is sparse at best. So they would be able to track when we're having board meetings, our agenda, the minutes. They can put a link on on respective municipal sites to the board and us back to the municipalities. What some boards have done is, Renfrew and area OPP Police Service Board is the caption, and then down the side is a list of all the respective municipalities that sit under the board. So they could go down and click, and then it'd take us straight to our respective boards, our respective municipalities, and then a similar link back. So that will get the cross communication going, which is a mandated responsibility for us. And we will not always have the luxury of having Carolyn with us. So this will be a big way to keep that communication going back to the municipality. Website hosting is just ongoing. Professional services will be primarily for the first year. We'll need some legal advice in terms of structuring, possibly going for incorporation, which is what some boards are doing, because right now we just sit under the legislation. Some are doing that just for a little extra protection. It's small, it's $700 and 2 hours of a legal fee. The rest of that is for finance, because we do have money sitting with Renfrew that need to transfer into the board once the board is set up and has its accounting policies in play. And it would be important to have a review done for both sides, both for Renfrew and for us, because there's quite a bit of money that's been flowing back and forth. And I think it's important that we all do that risk management piece so we're very comfortable that we have no exposure. And then our membership fee, which is the annual fee to the Ontario Association, which we're bound by if we're going the insurance route. And it's they have a wealth of knowledge for us. It's like us being part of OMA, the Ontario Municipality Association. So I'll stop there. Thoughts, comments? Lisa?
My thoughts, my hope is that this is a very generous budget intended as a placeholder in order to satisfy the need to have a budget.
Correct.
And my hope is that we will all make diligent choices so that this is indeed the outside highest number, again, to satisfy the requirement that we have. And
Correct.
that being the case, it's certainly something I can support, but not enthusiastically, and again, with a lens on being frugal.
I think for the first year, this is relatively close to target. Going forward, this will be a significantly lower number because we're not going to have the professional fees, the website design. Strat planning is something that we do once every 2 or 3 years, not every year. I
have a question on all of this, and because I'm old, my memory is horrible. Did we make decisions in terms of a procurement process, things like that? So for example, when it comes to strat plan, are we expecting to make a request of others and just see where we land? And
So-
Carolyn's hitting her button there.
So on governance, the Ontario Association, the association level, they're starting to develop an awful lot of templates that we can pick and choose from, and they're looking now at all the governance tools that we need, but we can also beg and borrow from other municipalities and other police boards, because we're all in the same situation, so they're starting now to have a lot of options. So our terms of reference and our initial, what was the first one we did? Terms of reference and the bylaw? What was the first document?
We've only officially approved the procedural bylaw. You
That's it,
pulled the
procedural.
terms of reference.
Yeah.
If I could cut in, Chair.
Yeah.
Through legislation, there are requirements for certain policies to be developed. Procurement is one of them. And there are other key ones that, again, the board's going to need to look at sooner rather than later to ensure that they're in compliance.
And that's part of the reason the association has picked up that work, to help give us a template. But I also think in our 6-month term, 6 months into 2025, we bring this back, or whenever we land on his approved budget, with an actual 6 months in, and that will help us fine tune the costs. And I suspect, I hope municipalities and councils will realize that, you know, this is something that we're coming into new. We're keeping it as fine-tuned as we can, but there are areas in here where their one-time setup costs in future budgets won't be as significant. Yes.
I think, again, the one-time cost, whether it's, you know, and I'm interested that some of the boards are incorporating, that actually makes sense to me, given the liability. Because, again, it's a change for a lot of the councillors. On a board, for instance, you have liability for wages individually. You have specific individual liability. If the people don't get paid, you are liable as an individual. They can come and sue you personally. So it changes all of that. You haven't got the same protection you have as a council member by coming onto a board. The Canadian legislation of board members is remarkably different and quite challenging in that respect. So I think for me, getting my question at the front end was, is that enough legal fees at the front end to set this up? So I think I go back to your point saying I'm hoping it's enough, and I really like the idea of the 6-month review, and ideally it won't. But when I hear that some of the boards are incorporating, it kind of makes sense to me because of the topic we may deal with and the rest of it, and our own personal liability of coming onto the board. So again, I'm going to watch this with interest, because I think to you, I actually challenged Rob when we went through the budget going, is that enough? Because lawyers will eat money like there's no tomorrow. So I think we have to watch this fairly carefully, and I think that's when I look at the bottom, and I'm doing that deliberately, is that we got that 10%. I think we have to be quite careful to watch where we go with that and watch this expenditure on setup costs quite carefully, because it will be interesting for me to see how this evolves and how other boards, you know, follow the same path. But yeah, at the moment there's an awful lot of unknowns on this budget that we are trying to set in tone. But I also go back to Rob's sort of initial, we've got to get something out of the CAOs to say, what do you think, to get a close enough for government work, and then we can get it in front of the councils, which is its own process to get this going, because otherwise we end up with, you know, no budget.
I must be fairly new to this, because we will get sued for what?
So so we're no longer under the municipality. We sit under the
Okay.
Police Services Board.
I understand that, but why
So-
would somebody sue us?
As a board member, we have a fiduciary responsibility, and if we employ staff, which we will be doing through our admin person, we are responsible for submitting mandatory costs to Revenue Canada on the 15th of each month. If that is not done, the Revenue Canada has access to retrieve those funds from the sitting board members, because it's our legal responsibility to collect and remit taxes. And that's across all businesses. So one of the things I've done on a board every quarter is ask for an attestation that all fees have been paid to the government. And that we also carry directors and officers liability for wrongful dismissal and those types of things. But anything owing to the government, we are personally liable for on any sitting board that you're on. Lisa? Sorry, where if we have an attestation and we are told by our team that we're good, that liability falls off of us and to the operator, because we've done our due diligence to confirm through a formal attestation.
Through you, Chair, I would just like to add to the fact that we do have grants and we are applying for grants, and those grants fall under the Police Service Board. If there are challenges that come from those, there is liability to the board.
Which is covered through the insurance. The only thing we're personally liable for is monies owing to the Receiver General of Canada. And the rationale is, if you're a sitting board member and you don't pay your taxes, in the real world, you're accountable. If the corporation or the entity doesn't pay, they go to that person who is responsible for the entity, which is us.
So in some ways, we're jumping around because
Yes.
I think we're supposed to, but it's relevant as well. Do we, and again, I apologize if this has been discussed, is there not an option to contract that position and have them be responsible for their own remittances?
It's not advisable, because they do form an employee-employer relationship, because we will be directing them to do certain activities and to undertake and represent us. If it's a pure contract, they're coming in to perform one function, they do it and they move on. That's the role of a contractor, which would be out where they're independent doing their own work. Once they are the face of the organization, and they'll be involved in all of those governance and operational settings, they'll be the ones helping to draft the strat plan, all the different reports. We currently have that at the moment running under one of the grants, and it will continue until that grant expires or the term, and then we'll have to see moving them under unemployment. It's safer for us, it's better for us, and it's the standard. Revenue Canada looks unfavorably at organizations that use that, because they're stepping away from the employer responsibility of submitting for CPP and EI premiums. So, and to that, are we relatively okay with governance and operational flag? Angela? Oh no, I saw your poker face.
Do we want to move that section?
But now's the time if there's, okay.
Did we want to move that section then, if that's the case, going with?
Okay, all right.
So moved by John and seconded by?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you, carried. IT, phone, and supplies were loosely formed. We're going to need some IT support, and we will need, if we're hiring somebody, I'm not sure how it works in your respective councils. In our case, we get $30 a month to use our own personal cell phone. If we hire somebody to be our administrator, he or she would use their own phone, and we'd have a little bit of money to provide them a monthly stipend to offset the cost. I don't think we need to incur a special phone number for the board, but that's open to discussion. Or again, to park that for 6 months out. And then Lisa?
Instead of a phone number, would an email address?
Yes.
Work? It's quite a few organizations I've worked with, they just have an email address, that way if whoever's looking after it changes, it's not an issue.
Good point. Perfect. And that would come with our IT, with the website and everything else that goes with it. Lisa?
And that was kind of my thought as well. $3,000 is $250 a month. And especially if we have the website design and hosting, that usually comes with email addresses as well baked into that. So there wouldn't be, and there's no extra cost usually with having email addresses. So I'm not following exactly what the IT and.
So the IT is to purchase a laptop that would be the sole property and would only have on that laptop material relating to the police board. So it's a one-time setup cost.
Okay, I didn't realize that that's what that was. Okay.
I think it's unfair if we hire somebody, and again, employee, employer, we need to provide the tools to do the job. And then everything we own is dedicated on one computer, moved up to the cloud, but there is no personal information, there's no, for ATIP requests and all this other stuff, we just have one clean unit where everything is located in one spot. If the person moves, the laptop stays with the organization. Supplies, pens, papers, bits and pieces, stereo, coffee spot for the office, essentials. The administrator talked to a number of boards. They are all going, the majority of boards are going to this point where it's one individual, $30 an hour for an average of 20 hours a week. And the way they're doing it is in a month, there will be, around meetings, there'll be a few days getting ready, taking the minutes, and then getting the minutes out and all of that goes around with our 8 minutes in our committee meetings. But then there's also, at the onset, there'll be a lot of work at just coordinating our governance policies and crossing our T's and dotting our I's. This is, a number of boards have found people who are newly retired and experienced, not necessarily out of the municipal field, but out of a field for running an agency. So somebody either from municipality, we don't close that out, but somebody who's stepping out of running the United Way office or been involved in other boards that understand the dynamics of a board. It's not somebody who's right out of school looking for a startup job at 20 hours a week. And that's how we keep the number low, because they're not interested. They're not driven by the money, they're driven by the opportunity to step into something new and build it from the ground up. And that would definitely have the mandatory employment costs attached to it. So there'd be WSIB, CPP, EI premiums on both on employer side, and then other miscellaneous that come along with it. Lisa?
I have a question. The intention, is it to be at a rate of 20 hours, $30 an hour, or is the intention that it be billable hours?
Billable hours up to, and we would do that by a month. So averaging 20 hours a week up to 80 hours in a month, period.
Okay, and
There'd be a
again,
contract around that, which is something we discussed, because if the board determines we need to up that a little for, we may be really busy in January and February, but slowing in March and April, we want to set an average so that we know at the end of the year we're not to exceed the 31.2 without board discussion.
so comment on that. I find this to be, I find it to be very generous. We shouldn't have problem getting a quality candidate in my mind.
Correct.
With this. And again, with the understanding that this is at the extreme, because if we are meeting let's say every 2 months, let's call it, say, once we level off, that's 160 hours of work for what might amount to a 2-hour board meeting. Recognizing again that there are some grant applications, there are other administrations, but I'm sure Carolyn would even say she's not working 20 hours a week on us right now, I hope.
It's surprising. It's surprising how much time Carolyn is.
No, and I don't mean, I know how hard she is working. I think Renfrew would probably be screaming from the rafters if, I hope they would be screaming from the rafters if
But as
you were putting the
example,
majority of.
not just Carolyn, but I'm probably doing easily $20 a week now, or 20 hours a week, just in terms of filling out the insurance paper. I'm not transferring that to her. We have meetings we need to set up with the incoming detachment commander and the town of Renfrew to unpack some of the grants and look at a relationship going forward. It caught me how much time is spent in the weeds, and that will be the role of this individual. He or she would be the point person to make all of this happen.
So my comments on this would be similar to the other items, in the interest of having a budget that we can bring forward. I'll be agreeable to it, but I'm taking some water with my wine on this one for sure. It's uncomfortable. We are, I know I'm not speaking just for the town that I come from, but it's going to be a tough budget year for a number of us around the table. And recognizing this isn't a business, but making decisions as though this is our business and that there is, responsibility that gets tied to that, I think is important. So I will agree to this in the interest of moving it forward, but with the hopes that there will be close scrutiny and accountability for the hours that we do receive from our person. And I don't want to limit them either, right? So if there is a week where it's 30 hours and it's heavy and they need to put that in, the expectation would be that, the offset is there for future weeks as well.
Expectation is at the end of the month, the time averages out to 20, to a maximum. It is billed, as we do with the grants, you bill for the time that you're working. And that we review it. We don't need to come together in a meeting, but it can be, a report to the board every month, which is just a one-pager, because we don't need to spend $1,000 to come to the table and look at it, but every month we would get a report from this individual. John?
I think, to the point of, I looked at this initially and went, how much? Like 4 hours a day? Like doing what? And then I started to get all the setup costs and the rest of it, and even the new training that came out. We're not registered, right, with that organization. They sent me an email today saying, can you send me a list of everyone you need? I was like, I think there's going to be a lot to do at the front end, but I think for me, we do the 6-month review and we check to see, is it still doing that? And ideally, over time, this does reduce, to your point. We get a steady state. And maybe there's bumps, like when we're doing applications or whatever. So maybe there's a different way of doing this. But I think initially get this set up and going. But I specifically want that 6-month review on this. Because I literally did the, what? When we had this conversation, 4 hours a day doing that? And then it came out of how much Rob is doing that he probably, the administrator should be doing, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I think I looked at this at the front end saying, at the front end, this seems reasonable. Over time, I very much hope this is going to reduce.
Other questions? So that brings the total, it'll be changed a little bit by readjusting some of the things we agreed to in honorariums, but down to 122 a year. That is on par with the mean that most boards are landing on. So we're not out of the scope of what most boards are considering as a budget. And that was the discussion I had in the halls of AMO with a lot of other boards who were setting up. With the exception of really small northern communities where my favorite was the one that said we will meet 4 times a year on a Saturday from 9 till 10, from 11 till 12, from 1 to 2, and from 3 to 4. Go away, we'll see you next year. But we're in, it's a big number. But it's a little bit frustrating because the province has clearly downloaded this and not providing funding. They're turning to municipalities to fund it, which is not fair, but it's where we're stuck.
Yes, what is MERCS?
Mandatory employment-related costs.
And what's the employer cost?
So, well, the same, the mandatory, so it's when we hire somebody, so you're working at the township, for the township, you will have possibly CPP coming off of your pay. The employer is matching that and submitting that to Revenue Canada. You're paying into EI, and the employer matches your payment to EI. So those are the costs. Then there's WSIB, mandatory costs of hiring an employee and reporting back to the government.
So on the $150 a meeting, we're paying,
Not you, the board will. The corporation will be paying your, if it's determined it's 150 honorarium and there's no taxes, we won't have that. So we will check that. But if we do have to deduct taxes on it, the board will be, the association, the detachment board will be responsible for remitting their portion of your contribution to EI and CPP.
okay, thank you.
Still have to pay your tax on that,
Yeah.
150.
Yes, as an honorarium?
On honorarium, you have to pay tax off of that too. Yeah.
You have to use your mic, Scott. You have to use your mic. It's very loud.
Sorry. Yeah, no, off that 150, you have to pay tax.
Oh, I realize that.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to pay tax on anything you make, but I didn't know, I thought the employer cost was like for actually Carolyn right now.
Oh, okay.
But
so
that's
no.
for us. And
If we
then
could
the
get her
MERCS
for
is for Carolyn.
$5,200, we'd keep her. Yeah, exactly.
I know, but I'm just using,
No, just for clarifying, so the employer cost, again, back on the honorarium, there is a cost, and I did get it verified from our HR coordinator here when she paid the honorarium for the previous police service board. There is a cost that we have to remit. I'm not exactly sure on the percentage. She's trying to find out for me. But then, yes, the separate is the employee. If you're a hired administrator, there are those requirements. So even though an employee, their salary take home is, $31,000, certainly the employer has additional costs on top of that that are relevant that we need to budget for as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, through you, Chair. Just to go back, just to close the loop on that, then can we, if there's no further questions on the program expenses part, then we can do the move and seconded to kind of close that loop. Moved by Angela.
Second by John. All right. So between the two of us, we can go back and update the budget. Just going through the honorariums, we've adjusted that.
Through you, Chair, I'm not sure who initially has control of the spreadsheet. I've seen the
I can
PDF.
do it, but I'll call you bilaterally and we'll drop the numbers in. I'll modify this and have this ready to go back out.
Sure, there's a few other spelling tweaks I'd like to do along the way that I've noticed.
Yeah. Okay. And then once this is done, it still stays as a draft until such time as we're ready to submit it to council through the CAO. So it will stay in draft until it goes to the CAO, saying this is our draft budget that we have landed on at this table at the board level. And we're submitting it for their early consideration. Then we will arrange for it to go under separate cover to each of the municipalities for council deliberations and to vote on. We want to keep this in draft until October 1st. at which point we will have our insurance in position. I'd be nervous because we're dealing with financial matters and there's a potential liability, I would like to keep it in draft so that it is not something that we're standing accountable for. It's still a discussion document. It would even stay in draft, I would think, until the municipalities support it. But we do not want to take the draft off of it until we have the insurance. And those documents are going in later today to the association, and they're suggesting, it's Jennifer Williams who's handling it at the association. They're suggesting the closing date is 13th of September for applicants to apply. They're hoping the following week we'll have the information in position. So it may be the third or fourth week of September, but certainly by the 1st of October. But we want to be really clear, it's still a draft document, that we're not held accountable to it until we've got the coverage. Anything else on this? Thoughts, ways forward? Does it make sense in terms of presenting it to CAOs? And then at council, we have the option to also suggest we would have a representative speak. I'm not sure if it's better for us to speak individually at our respective, or would it be good to have somebody else there as well? Lisa?
My thoughts, at least in the little corner that I call home, my suggestion would be that we do have someone from at least the finance committee there and available to answer questions and deflect in that way, with the understanding that they may not even be called to answer those
But to be
questions,
in the
but to
room.
at least have them available and maybe eliminate the need for any back and forth.
Yeah. I mean, the board's willing to do, I think, whatever we need to do to help the individual voices in front of council. We don't want the whole posse showing up and filling the chambers to stand and root, but, or intimidate. What back here, and then to you, Scott?
Believe it or not, my preference would be for at least a finance and yourself. I'm not the best speaker, so I probably get tongue-tied at times, so yeah, for myself.
It takes the pressure off as well because you are the sitting councillor. So, okay, finance and the chair.
That's up to each council.
Okay.
That's my preference.
Scott?
I was just going to say that I'd be more than willing to go with you and,
Okay.
you know, as the two of us, and if we were to chat on, you know, with regards to talking to finance or
Okay.
whatever, I have no problem.
I still think it's important to have finance there because they're ultimately, and maybe I'd even suggest John, because Jason is also an elected official. You're the community rep. I think your voice would carry.
And your experience in said.
Okay.
Sorry, through you, Chair, just to clarify, so is this when the board finalizes the budget and it is brought forward to the council, or is this?
To be in the council chambers when the council is deliberating on approving the budget. So each municipality needs to approve the budget.
Okay,
And then majority rules?
Has to be by consensus.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
You know.
so if I could recommend that, as you said, that the draft budget be circulated to the CAOs and treasurers in draft mode for some feedback and review, that information can then be brought back to. I do feel that there's a bit of a disconnect with the municipalities at this point.
From my understanding, we're passing our budget fairly early this year, so just a second here. Yeah, we're going to have it adopted by December 4th, and September 18th is our first meeting.
So this can go out tomorrow to the CAOs
Okay.
with a week turnaround. We can incorporate their feedback and then have it back out.
That's great in terms of timing. The challenge is going to also be in terms of the distribution right? Because, as I understand it, we're not taking it and cutting it into 7 pieces.
Correct.
So having some kind of an understanding on how what that's going to look like, when will we have that? Because that's a very important piece in
It
terms
is.
of,
I wonder, was that discussed at the January meeting with the CAOs?
There was no formal decision made at that time. There was conversations around how we might go about it based on a population basis. I do know this board discussed it back in June as well. And I know you had brought forward some information from one of your zone meetings as to what other boards are doing. But again, I do feel that there is some discussion with the CAOs and treasurers that need to take place. And a consensus that needs to come to. The challenge being that if there is no consensus, then it gets kicked to the province and the province decides. So might I suggest a meeting either with a representative of the finance committee or subcommittee or the chair with the CAOs present and potentially the treasurers present?
So do CAOs get together on a monthly basis?
Not to my knowledge. You need your mic on, Scott. Sorry, there are discussions with the CAOs. I think I could try to arrange a meeting with all the CAOs.
Perfect. Would it be worth having treasury? Is there, the treasurers is the same meeting, or is this better for?
I do think the treasurers would like some discussion and to be involved in the discussion.
I just have a question. What is it about this decision that makes it a CAO treasurer decision and not a board decision? Help me to understand that.
So our role, technically, we could take this and send it right now, well, excluding insurance and other considerations. We could send this straight to the municipalities now, asking for them to adopt it. That I don't think is the best way forward. I think the best way is an informal review with CAOs to educate and hopefully bring them on side, because they will be a strong voice within the municipal setting when it comes before council for discussion. And they would be able to provide valid input that, you know, there are areas, if it's not going to fly at that level, it will not fly at council. And it gives us a chance, I think, to get it closer to getting consensus if we meet with them first. Yeah.
Sure, no, I understand. What I mean is, what is it about the split and how we're going to do the proportional cost sharing that makes it a CAO clerk decision or treasurer decision and not a board decision, just that I can understand?
Most boards to date have gone on population base, and that's how the OPP budget is funded now. We leave that to the discussion at the CAO level with us, but how they determine to pay is really falls into their court. It's not a decision of the board. The decision of the board is to present a budget that will be paid by the municipalities. How they want to do it is around their table. We can educate by saying this is what most boards are doing, and it's in line with the OPP costs that they're bearing now through the population base or their traditional split.
Yeah. Sorry, through you, Chair, to Lisa's point, you're correct in saying that it is a board decision. Ultimately, the control on how the board would like to divide the representation. You are going to need, it is a board decision. This goes back to when we went through the membership. Yes, the board has the decision-making power to do it, but you will need the support and the backing. And just to further, sorry to go, I've just been told that the next CAO meeting is September 9th, so that would be a good time to discuss.
So if it is ultimately our decision in terms of how that proportional representation takes place, do we as a board want to feed that into our CAOs and treasurers in advance of the September 9th meeting? I suspect they would probably appreciate that. So if we're going to discuss it today, it would mean an amendment to
Put
the
that in
agenda.
when the email goes to them with this draft, that it's our recommendation. See, I didn't realize, I was under the assumption from the legislation that our role is to present the budget to the 7 municipalities or 6 municipalities, whatever sits on the board. The budget needs to be covered. It's up to them as to how they want to do it. I could be wrong, but. You think it's coming from us? I think our recommendation is solid, that.
But that's a one number. I would suggest that the gloves will actually come out when it comes time to determine proportional representation, and that the heavy lifting and decision-making recommendations on that, I would think would be from the board, and then fleshed out and discussed amongst CAOs and treasurers just for the best outcomes. Because if we step back and say, hey folks, here's our proposed budget, you figure out how this is going to be split, I think we're going to get that much further away from our consensus versus if we have a united front when it does go to them with our recommendations on how this is going to be. And I haven't given any, I would like time before coming up with, I haven't given any thought to that because I haven't given any thought to that at this point in time.
Okay. Do we have? Yeah, let me come up with a paragraph that would sit in the email about the budget. The intent of discussion at the meeting, and then a paragraph on a recommendation for the population-based approach, and maybe a paragraph of ministry position, which I can get from Graham.
Okay, and are we going to have some discussion on it? Just, has there been a decision that it's going to be exclusively population-based and not geographical coverages? Because there are a lot of elements and a lot of interesting things to consider as part of. No?
No, I never even thought of that. I was just told,
Like I know, for example, from City of Ottawa, that covering a rural area is almost as expensive to have 2 officers there as it is to have 5 officers in a condensed small area. So I think having an understanding of costs and how they, like it's not an easy question to answer. I'm sorry to complicate things with my questions, but I think we need to get at least the formula. That's something that we have to get right.
John?
Is it simpler to say, how does the OPP charges flow? And we just say, follow the same model, right? Because we don't want to create an independent model for the governance that sits above the organization. If they're funded one way, we want, using one formula, we just use the same formula for us. And you can't really argue with that because there's already a formula in place and you're just using precedents.
Which is the population base.
Further to
I'd like
that,
to say the same thing. We already have one in place. Why reinvent the wheel?
further to that, that was Graham, when Mr. Wright was here and speaking to our board as well as previously, that was kind of the recommendation that was, or the discussion that occurred, and that if the formula is already there, that should probably be considered. And I believe that is how the CAOs initially had that conversation as well.
Thank you. So we'll put that in the covering letter to set the tone. And September 9th, can we get on that agenda? Pretty quick.
I will see.
Okay. All right. Round table, anything else, Scott?
I don't think so. Just hope to see the board in Pembroke and see how the inner workings and meet with the different boards. And there's a reception Wednesday night. So just, I don't have to say it, but be respectful to the position that we've been given for this one particular meeting. And, yeah, I think it's, in the last 6 months, a lot has been accomplished. You've put on a heck of a lot of extra miles trying to get a new vehicle. So, you know, every time we talk, you're on your way to this meeting or that meeting, or talk to this person, talk to that person, and it's just, yeah.
All good.
I just like to also say thank you to everybody in the individual different things that everybody brings to the board, and I think we have probably one of the best boards. I might be a little biased, but I honestly do think hearing other boards talk and then getting to see firsthand what our board has to bring, I think we're one of the top.
Thank you, Scott. John?
The thematic training, I emailed the Ontario Police College, and they came back to me saying, yeah, we just need a list of all the people who need, from your organization, who need this training, because you need, it's a different registration than the one we've done for the earlier training. So do you want me to send that to you, Carolyn, and coordinate, or do you want, I can do it if you want me to send the list of names of everyone on the board and get the training if you want.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that because they do have a list, but I will follow up with them, and I do know that other members of the board have been having challenges trying to get logged on. So
Yeah.
we'll I'll send out a message with the updated lists as well, because there's other members other than just this who's here in this room today that are part of it. So I'll follow up and then get something sent out. Sorry, my understanding when they initially sent us the details was that if you've already got an account set up through the student portal, that it would be there waiting for you, and that seems to not be the case.
No.
And that's the way it read, too.
That's right.
Yeah,
So-
it did. And it's not, it's a different organization this time, by the look of it. Because this is the Ontario Police College versus the previous group, which was not the Ontario Police College. Before it was the Inspector General's group. It was his portal, or their portal. Now it's the Ontario Police College, which is a different org.
So you're having the same problem then, Stephen? Guys, see you shaking your head up there.
So-
Yeah, I haven't even gotten a response, but it is my understanding 2 different
Yeah.
sites, yeah.
And anything in closing comments, Dave?
Just thanks for accommodating me virtually today. And
It's as
thanks
if
for
you're
the-
in the room. Works out well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Lisa?
Nothing, guys.
Connie?
Nothing.
Angela? Carolyn?
It would be nice to know when our next meeting is planned for.
Let's pause for a day or two until we get this done, and then we'll set something up in end of September. I just have one thing. We received a letter the other day for the OPP Special Olympic Run. It's an annual event. They've been doing it for quite some time. It's happening on Friday. Is it Friday?
Brianna sent me a message.
It's in Arnprior in the afternoon at 10 o'clock in the morning here in Renfrew.
26th.
The 26th, thank you. Friday the 26th. It's run by the OPP. It's not a board activity. It's something.
That's not a Friday, the 26th.
No, that's a
Friday.
Tuesday.
That's a Thursday,
Okay, sorry.
the 26th
Yeah.
of September.
29.
29th.
I have my calendar.
I have it in my email. I just haven't popped it up. But
It looks like I'm not going to be able to be there, which is.
Yeah, 26 is a Thursday, so
yeah.
All places that welcome going to have a thing that day.
What day is it confirmed on?
It is confirmed on September 26th for both
26th.
Arnprior and Renfrew
Thank you.
at the town. I believe both are starting at 10 a.m.
So it starts here at 10. It's not a requirement for us to be here. In the past, the chair just stood at the starting gate to see the kids off, and they walk from the township in Renfrew to the OPP Detachment. There's hamburgers and hot dogs for them. It's kind of a nice thing to see, and it's full of kids that are energized and looking forward to the hike. A lot of OPP officers will be in attendance with them walking. It's not a board event. They do it as a thing across OPP. But I just wanted to announce that it's coming up, and if anyone's in town and wants to be standing at the start line when it starts, more than welcome. Also welcome to walk with them, but it's not something that's traditionally been done.
I'll probably be down in the Arnprior end.
Okay, perfect.
Actually, that would be appreciated because I'm not going to be able to be there, so if there is board
so
representation in
then
that
I'll-
corner.
Because you're up at this one?
I'm going to be at
She'll be in Gold Lake.
Pickwog, yeah, I'll be in Golden Lake. There's so I'll
Yeah,
let
okay.
Brianna know and then connect the two of you. She's sort of a resource
Yeah, I'll
officer.
definitely be there. I'll try to get some more bird. I'll try to get Kevin and, try to get as many as I can.
Good. All right, so nothing else. Thank you all. We'll bring this to close at 11:47. We will do an email on our next board meeting. Normally we do it at this meeting, but because there's so many moving parts, and we have the opportunity in a few days to be in front of CAOs, we'll then send out a notice because we may need one sooner than later. If all is good, we'll just go for our traditional time, but give us a few days to figure the landscape out. Thank you, sir, for signing in and being with us virtually. Much appreciated. And thank you all for coming out.